Hello, Scilla. Welcome to the Transformational Learning Summit.
Happy to be here.
It's an honor to have you. I'm so inspired by your lifetime of contribution to the world and to peace. And so I'm also really excited to talk to you about this domain because you run one of your programs on our platform. I'd love to start with with a question about what does transformation mean to you?
Transformation to me is when we move from our main use of the mind intelligence to the heart intelligence, because that's where I hear and resonate with people's truth, with how they are often taking a little more time to express and show and reveal who they really are through their heart intelligence. So that's transformation for me at the moment.
Hmm. What does that mean to you? How does that show up, the heart intelligence? How does it show up for you when you sense it in another person? And how would you say it shows up within you as your heart intelligence?
When I sense it from another person, I get a feeling of grounding, as though that person is really steady in themselves, and that what I'm getting is the real thing, instead of what they might like to try and project. What we all often try and be something that we're really not. And the heart doesn't lie. So I think that's the feeling that I get. And also surprises. Heart intelligence comes out with things that we're not really expecting and that we hadn't thought out. And so it's very fresh and very intuitive. That's why I love it.
And how does it show up within you, your heart intelligence?
Within me.
Mm.
Mm. Well, first of all, I can feel it. Right now, for example, I can feel a resonance, and also I'm feeling a lot of gratitude to my heart for its honesty. If I'm really in my heart, I can't be false. And hopefully I've got more access to what is truthful about whatever's going on in the world or what we're talking about. It's also power. There's a lot of power in it.
Is this heart intelligence, was it always the predominant guiding force within you, or is it something that you discovered as you went deeper into your work?
Yeah, definitely. I didn't really discover it until probably about 5 years ago, because when let's see, it was 2019, well before the pandemic struck, I had this intuition that something was coming towards the human race that would require a great deal of wisdom, kindness, generosity, compassion, and the capacity to deal with fear and death. I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what it was, but I just sat down and wrote for 2 weeks. And that kept taking me to the heart. And so when I asked myself what to call this, I knew it immediately, and I called it the mighty heart, because I'd been shown that the heart knew, and that the heart had this vast capacity for all those qualities that I've just mentioned. And I've always known that, but it was very, very real, and became evident to me as the details of the COVID struck us all, that it was true. That was what we were going to need.
I would guess, and I just want to confirm this with you, that you've likely been guided by your heart your whole life, but this is more of a conscious realization of that there's a there.
Absolutely. And right from the age of 11, or I was 10 when my brother, whom I adored, was killed very suddenly and dramatically, and it broke my heart. And it was that heartbreak that's been with me ever since, where I have now discovered the energy for change is there behind the heartbreak. So if I or others can access whatever it is that broke our heart, and be willing and brave enough to peer into it, we can find a huge energy for ourselves to do whatever we need to do to bring about change, whether in our own lives or in the lives of others or on the planet.
I've heard you talk about this question. I think it's part of your course, What Breaks Your Heart. Can you say a little more?
Well, that thing, that what little book that I wrote over those 2 weeks very quickly became an online course. And of course, that opened up the possibility of teaching in a wonderfully powerful way. And the first module of the course is called What Breaks Your Heart? So every participant is asked to examine the answer to that question, and to stay in the heartbreak for as long as is needed to discover that there is a huge energy there for change. And so that takes us into the other parts of the course. There are altogether 10 modules. But we realize very quickly that one of the key things to do is to use some of the great teachings that there are to galvanize and employ the energy of the heart in ways that we probably had not done before. Undoubtedly, we would have done it if there was a tragedy or a grief that called upon the heart directly. But I believe that many of us go through our days without consciously using the power of this heart, this mighty heart, for wise guidance. So the modules unfold with learning, for example, to listen to others. We all think we're good listeners, and most of us really are not. In fact, when I was asked to work with the international vice presidents of a very big luxury goods company worldwide, and I was first up on their first day of their retreat in a very luxurious Indonesian resort. And so I started off by saying, gentlemen, we're going to concentrate straight away on listening. And they went, oh, we listen all the time, you know, we spend our lives listening to our teams and our all the people that we work with, and we don't need to learn anything about listening. And I said, well, great, let's just check. And so I put them into couples, into pairs, and gave them an exercise on listening. And by the end of the first round, which was about 15 to 20 minutes, when they were asked to listen intently to their partner and then repeat back what they'd heard and check whether what they'd heard was correct. And they were white-faced because they had not listened. They got it wrong. They had missed crucial things in what they were told. And so they agreed that they needed, they wanted to do a bit of practice, and then we made it into a very integral part of their training for the executives of the company. And then it trickled right down to the shop floor.
I want to touch this question of what breaks your heart one more time. In terms of, I'm curious about the distinction between what breaks my heart as something that comes up in my head versus as something that's in my heart. You know, I might be like, oh, I'm really breaks my heart to see that suffering going on in the war in Ukraine and Israel, but not Ukraine, collapsing two wars into one, Israel and Gaza, Russia, Ukraine. But to really feel that heartbreak I think it requires maybe a certain a little more courage to connect with the felt sense of something. And I wonder if that's like how if you do see a distinction there, and how that the invitation to really connect with what breaks your heart, how you might guide that.
Exactly, Lawrence. The question you ask is very, very germane and apt for this, because especially when, you know, we read the news from Ukraine or from Gaza, and we feel a kind of a gulp and horror and sometimes revulsion, fear, and pity. And it often, we quite want it to pass quickly because it's uncomfortable. And so we sometimes sort of go on to the next thing, the next piece of news or whatever it is. And we don't really let it land with the full impact that it has within its potential, that sharing of the terror and the grief and the horror of what is actually going on in Gaza right now, as you and I are speaking. And so it's when we allow the feeling, which is in the heart, which the heart, as it were, shares, wants to share, wants to understand, and usually to have a response to the suffering of others. And that's a very, very powerful emotion, the emotion of wanting to respond, to do something, to help, to maybe it may be prayer for some people. It may be just allowing a shiver to go right through. Just as we were speaking, a shiver went right through my body of feeling for those children particularly. And that's where the power is. That's where the energy for change is. That's where that is much more likely to propel me to take an action to help, whatever it is, than simply absorbing the information in my mind or being able to swap information with a colleague or whatever. But it's the energy of needing and wanting to be of use. I love, I don't know if you know that Marge Piercy poem, To Be of Use. It's a wonderful poem, and she talks about being in harness as a horse or an ox pulling a cart in service to the world. And actually, the last module of the Mighty Heart course is exactly about that. It's condensing and distilling the skills that people have learned during the course as to how they can respond better to crises, whether it's in their own family or in their surroundings or further afield, how they can take a stand on what they believe in, how they can deal with their own inner critic. I'm sure you, and as well as everybody else, has an inner critic that grabs our tail often in the middle of the night and wakes us up and tells us all the things we didn't do well or what mistake we made, and kind of grills us. And it's really important, I think, for us to be able to really use our hearts and be in genuine service, is to deal with that inner critic. And people have many ways of doing that, but my favorite, you'll probably find it rather odd, but shall I tell it to you anyway?
Absolutely. Please do.
If my inner critic wakes me up at 3 o'clock in the morning and says, Scilla, how could you do that? Honestly, you sounded so stupid when you were making that speech. And honestly, it just made me want to yawn. And I will kind of, toss and turn and shudder and try to silence it, but it won't work. And eventually I'll get up. Usually I go into the bathroom so I don't wake my husband, and put the heater on, and I will set out 2 cushions. And the one cushion I sit on at first, and the other cushion is for the inner critic. So I'll sit on my cushion. I'll say, why did you wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning? And then I switch myself to the other cushion and I speak as the inner critic. And you've no idea what comes out of its mouth. It's usually worse than the first awakening, about what I did or didn't do, how embarrassing I was, how much I left out of what I could have said, and all the rest of it. And so then I go back on my cushion and I say, that is not very helpful. What do you really want me to know? Because my experience tells me that the inner critic knows what I need to know on this issue. And so I go back to the inner critic's cushion and I answer in a different tone, usually still pretty forbidding, but a bit more helpful. And then I go back to my own cushion and I say, yes, okay, thanks, but you know a lot more about what would help in this situation. Please tell me what you know. And then I go back to the inner critic's cushion and it starts to really deliver the goods. It will tell me things I never knew I knew. In its voice, but me speaking still. And that's the way I've discovered. And I always take my journal with me and write down what it says, because it has huge wisdom, but it does take a bit of patience and impatience with it. I have to be a bit impatient with it if it's not telling me the truth. But it has huge wisdom for me.
Can you give me an example
of
the kind of wisdom it gives you?
It might say to me, if it was remonstrating with me for making a fool of myself in public, it might say, there was a moment, Scilla, when the audience grew quiet do you know what was happening? And I'll say, no, I don't know, because I didn't pay attention. And it will say, something you said at that moment really reached people, reached their hearts. And it was this, and it will remind me what it was that I said that reached people. So it will tell me the truth. Not always palatable, but it will tell me the truth, which is often encouraging, because as a self-critical person, I can get overwhelmed by the dark side of who I am and what I do. And it's very good to be told by this inner critic some truth about what has been useful and what could be more useful in the future. That's how it works, really.
So coming back to your course, was when you put together, you wrote this book that you were inspired to create, and then you created the course. Was that the first learning experience of that nature that you put together?
No.
No.
I've had loads of them.
Mm.
I haven't made online courses out of all of them, but a lot of the methodologies that we've used over the years have been that kind of learning. For example, when I started getting involved in international issues of violence and misunderstanding, was way back in 1982, and I suddenly woke up, along with a lot of women in Britain, to the presence of nuclear weapons on our soil, and the fact that new nuclear weapons were being installed at a military base not very far away from where I lived. And loads of women got together and we marched and we surrounded this military base, and it became very famous. And eventually it took 10 years, we got rid of the missiles. But what I learned in that is that at that time, in the early 80s, nuclear weapons were a huge threat to humankind, as they are now. So I went to work at the UN on the issues, and then I realized, strap hanging on a tram on Broadway, I realized a voice in my head said, you're talking to the wrong people. If you want to do something about nuclear weapons, you've got to talk to the people who actually make the decisions. And so I said, well, who are they? And it went tick, tick, tick in my brain, where the military who design the campaigns, the weapons producers who design the vehicles, the missiles and the airplanes that carry the nuclear weapons, the physicists who design the actual plutonium, uranium, or whatever other fuel is going into the missiles, the intelligence people who set up the need for those weapons, and finally the politicians who sign the checks and approve it. And so I thought, well, you know, that's huge. Where do I start? And basically I got on a plane, came back to the UK, and started a research group around my kitchen table. Literally, I've still got the table. It's a little round table like that, with 3 of us, and none of us knew anything about any of this. And we just studied, asked people, phoned people, read books. And it took us 4 years when we produced our first book, which was called How Nuclear Weapons Decisions Are Made, in the then 5 nuclear nations. And it had diagrams of how the departments work, and even who the key people in each department were. I was amazed that you could find this out, and especially without the internet then. We're talking 1986, 87. And I went into libraries in London, and I was really puzzled one day about how the Chinese nuclear weapons department in the Ministry of Defense was working. Couldn't get any information. And I looked up on the shelf way up above at the top, and I saw some folders, and my hand was drawn to them, and they didn't have a title on the back, but when I took them down, it said Chinese nuclear decision making. And it was a bit out of date, but it had the basis that I needed there. And I was surprised that it wasn't classified, you know, secret. But I took it and photocopied it quickly and ran away with it. And we worked, and we ended up taking 7 delegations to China, and they brought 7 delegations back to Oxford where we were working, and we invited Russians, French, Americans to meet them. They're opposite numbers. So that was the way it worked. But it was, you asked me a question about how these things drop into your heart.
Well, I was asking you about the process of teaching something and the methodologies that you've developed to cultivate these capacities for working with conflict or dealing with difficult situations.
Well, that whole experience taught me what listening is all about, because when we first got these people together, they would simply put their points of view, and they would only very, very rarely listen to each other. And so we took away desks, we made people sit in a circle, took off their name tags, no list of participants, nothing, and encouraged them simply to listen so carefully to what a neighbor had said, usually from another country and sometimes through an interpreter, and repeat it back. And everything changed from that minute. Everything. They developed confidence in each other, respect, which was vital. They weren't kind of deploring the other person because they were Russian or Chinese. They learned so much. And eventually this whole process, after 20 years, led to the basis of a couple of treaties that were then agreed by their foreign offices.
How do you go about teaching something like listening in a way that, you know, because there's listening, oh yeah, that sounds important, you know, like your executives at the Bali retreat, to actually discovering that there's this enormous capacity there and actually inviting someone to practice it?
I think it's mainly by starting off with no instruction at all and just saying to people, here's the exercise. We want you to sit in pairs and ask your partner a question. Here's the question. And listen to the answer. And then after 5 minutes, they'll ask you to repeat it back. The answer's quite long, but you know, what they repeated back had initially very little to do with what had been said. And they were shocked. So it was that shock that made people realize, made parents realize how little they listen to their children. What is my child actually trying to tell me? What can I read in my child's face or body, as well as the words? How can I respond to what's really needed, not what's being demanded? That sort of thing.
Is that so I love that you brought that quality in there of a deeper quality of sensing, not just what you're hearing in the words, but, you know, maybe being present to what is present for the other person. How do you integrate that into your Mighty Heart program as an invitation for people to begin to listen at that level?
Well, it's the second module, so it's a prerequisite for the whole of the rest of the course, because we want them to be able to use that skill and practice it every week for 10 weeks. As they get in their groups, you know, apart from the actual module teaching, people gather in groups with a facilitator to see whether they're really understanding what was taught. And and contributing to it very often. I mean, participants in our teachings have embellished the teachings very beautifully with their stories and with their experiences. So the listening exercise is a absolute sine qua non, you know, without which nothing can really happen in that course.
What are some of the other foundational parts of your program as far as, well, not so much of the program, and I'm sure the whole program is connected to this concept of the heart intelligence, but just in terms of the essence, what you consider to be the essential qualities for a person to recognize, to really connect with their heart intelligence?
Let me think about that. Take it to my heart. Lawrence, kindly say again what are you really looking for in my answer here? What most usefully contribute?
What are the essential qualities that are important for a person to connect with, to recognize, to help them really connect with the power of the heart?
Well, openness to the fact that the heart has power and wisdom. That's why we call it the mighty heart, because until we really start to pay attention to the heart, we have no idea of how powerful it is. And, you know, if you and I simply sat opposite each other and did nothing else but concentrate on our individual hearts and your heart, my heart, mutual heart, we would just learn so much, even without many words being spoken. But then I'll just tell you what I do is a very simple part of my meditation every day, is to quite quickly, you know, when my head's still buzzing with things I have done or ought to have done or whatever, I just go and put my hand, maybe both hands, on my heart, a little bit lower than what you can see on screen, and the heel of my right hand is on my heart, and I just take my attention to that, and the absolute immaculate beauty of the heart. I'm sure you know that it looks as rather like the way a cabbage folds around on itself to grow. The muscles of the heart fold around each other very beautifully like that. So I sort of imagine that powerful muscle and the blood pumping into it and through it and out of it. And then I just imagine my heart expanding. And I just watch and see how far it would like to expand. And sometimes it's just that much, sometimes that much, sometimes it's huge. And it usually, when I inquire, contains something I need to know. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does in its own way, in its own heartful way. So what have you learned about, you've been running the Mighty Heart program now for a number of years, 3 or 4 years? Is that right? What have you learned about teaching this online? What has emerged for you as far as how you effectively cultivate this heart intelligence in the people that participate in your program?
Well, first of all, I don't do much of the direct teaching now myself, because we understood pretty quickly that if we were to be able to expand this teaching, we'd need to train facilitators. So we very carefully chose, I think in the first cohort, there were 12 or 14. And since then, we've trained many more facilitators speaking in different languages to transmit the course. And each module of a course has the facilitator doing the introduction, some video from me, and then an online direct teaching from an expert in that subject. So Nicholas Yanni, for example, he teaches a very, very beautiful module, and others who are like the people at HeartMath in California teach heart intelligence for us as one of the final modules. So we have experts teaching, and what we found is that the facilitators and the teachers are so excited by the reception of the course by the students and the conversations that results, because there's online conversations going on pretty much all the time throughout the course for those that want them. And there's well, I'll give you an example from H&M. We work with an international retail company called H&M, and they cottoned onto this course very early and opened it up to quite senior members of the company. And they talked about, you know, boardroom conversations and how to transform those. And they got so enthusiastic about it that they asked me to go to Berlin and to spend a day with some of these executives. And I was absolutely blown away, because it was a room with about 30 people in it. Very nice, compact room in the middle of Berlin. And the ease with which these individuals expressed themselves, the joy that there was in the room. And I said, how come, you know, because I hadn't met most of them before. And I said, how come you're all so relaxed and open and frank and almost confessional in the way you talk to each other and recount what's happened to you? And they said, well, it's become normal for us. We realized how much we allowed to be formal or stiff between us before, and we decided we can do better than that. And so they just practiced and practiced being open, being honest, being heartful, and taking the risk of being thought silly, or all the risks that we're worried about. And they'd been doing this for a year, and they were just, there was
through your program, they got the inspiration for that through the
been doing
program.
the program for a year.
Wow.
And they were so light, that was the energy in the room was very light and playful almost. And it was as though they weren't senior executives in a big company, as though they were in, I don't know, in a very joyful environment. And that impressed me. I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I was really stunned by how informal this can make a bunch of chief executives.
How do you, when you're selling something like a course about connecting with heart intelligence to a large multinational corporation, like how do you approach that? How do you? I just feel like that's such an almost like a novelty that is maybe more available in the last decade than it was, say, in the 80s or 90s. So what, like, how is that does that positioned as far as like this is something that you guys should participate in?
Well, usually a recommendation has come to them from a colleague in another company. So they would say something like, we've heard that people get very excited over this course, and so we'd like to know more from you. So we will, before I talk with them, we'll normally send them materials that they can look at, so that you know, I'm not talking them through each module or using the time more usefully than that. So I'll mainly ask them what they want to know, what they need, what challenges are they discovering, what are they up against, what's heartbreaking for them in the business, what's frightening. And if you can get onto that level where a chief executive will start to talk, which is rare, about what's on the horizon that is causing them sleepless nights, then you really get a real conversation. So then we can talk about some real living problem that's confronting them, and they can judge for themselves whether what we're suggesting might be useful or not.
You also, a minute ago, you mentioned how early on you realized that in order to scale the program, you would need a team of facilitators. What was that? What was the initial process of training, of selecting and training those people like? Did you run the first cohort of the program yourself, or from the very beginning, did you have people that were helping you run it?
I ran it. There was no other way. I mean, I'd barely written the whole thing by then, and I had to do. It was a good exercise for me because I had to really think through what would be the right introduction to each module, to get people to realize that it was closely linked to what the previous module had been. It was a lead directly to this next module, and why that connection was made. But we would also obviously do the course in depth with those new facilitators, but then we would put them through the exercises you'd expect. We would ask them to run a module and then critique it. We would ask them to work in pairs with their colleagues and get feedback from their colleagues, all those sort of things, which and it produced a lot of laughter as well. They could laugh at themselves and laugh at what they hadn't heard when they were supposed to be listening. They could be quite self-deprecating, willing to investigate themselves and say, oh, I really blew it there. And that's a nice atmosphere to get in amongst a group who are training together.
How do you feel, having been running this program for a few years now, that that a learning program can be a form of activism, that it can be a vehicle for change at scale?
Oh, yes. For example, it's now used by our sister organization, Plan for Peace, who work in 6 troubled inner cities in the UK, where there's gang warfare and all kinds of frightening things for the occupants of that city. And so they train people to be willing, usually local people, to do the training and then go with one of our facilitators and call a meeting of, I don't know, it might be a scout group or a group training in body fitness or whatever it is. and really take them into a module or two and try it out with them and see how they felt about it. And they would probably want to apply it to a particular situation that they face, and we'd really take it from there. And we've learned a lot about how to improve the modules. I've rewritten some of the modules and the training materials for different countries and different environments. And we're about to start working with people in Ukraine who've been suffering terribly from the war, to enable them to regain their strength, particularly women.
What is your process for learning? Is that through conversations, through surveys? How do you get a sense of the success of the program, whatever the efficacy of the desired outcome might be, and actually create a feedback loop with your development process?
Yeah, we do that quite systematically. It's not something that I do, so it'd be best to talk to one of the people who actually do it. But we developed a program for assessing and measuring the impact and effectiveness as far as the clients were concerned. And if it's a local group, like a group in one of these cities in the UK, they're very good at giving feedback, and so we would get feedback from them, what worked for them, and it's all enumerated so that we can measure effectiveness in one circumstance as against another. But I don't actually do that, so you should talk to the people who do it.
And is the economics of it such that the sale of the program basically covers the expenses of the organization, or do you still have to get outside funding to be able to deploy the program in different contexts where maybe you aren't getting paid, like in Ukraine?
We up to now, we've asked the companies who hire us to agree to the fact that we will take the profits after our costs have been met, and so we'll take the profits and we'll give them to our sister organization, Plan for Peace, which is a charity. So that becomes what we call charitable money that they can use for the work with underprivileged parts of big cities. And at the moment, I'm just busy raising money for a big program in Ukraine, and I'm holding, I hope to hear tonight or tomorrow whether we'll get it or not. So that's why I'm somewhat on tenterhooks, and I'll leave you in minutes.
Well, I hope that works out for you. Yeah, I do feel one of the interesting dynamics of this kind of particular vehicle for change is also that it can often provide and the economics to be self-sustaining in a very natural way. So it's interesting to hear how you balanced it with the organizations and then the overflow going towards the sister organization to continue supporting the work.
Yes, that's right. And to give the trained facilitators a future as well, because they get a very good brief when they've become facilitators with us if they want to do other kind of work, and we always evaluate them carefully.
Scilla, I know you have to jump off. Thank you so much for your time, for the incredible work that you do in the world, and just for taking the time to share some of your wisdom and experience here, and also just feel very connected to my heart in this conversation as well.
Oh, good. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Lawrence. And if you use this recording and you get feedback from it, I'd be delighted to learn what the feedback is.
Absolutely. Lots of love. Thank you.
All right.